Cold War. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were clear from the beginning, but how did they start? Where did these bitter rivalries start that led to what is known as the Cold War? There are actually a lot of clear reasons. Now, before I go into any of this, keep in mind that the Cold War never had an official beginning. While everybody agrees that it started at some point between 1945 and 1947, not everyone agrees on an exact event that ignited it. In a war, the beginning would usually be marked either by a first shot fired or a declaration of war. The Cold War, however, was more like one of those awkward relationships between two people where they clearly hate each other, but neither of them really says it to each other's faces, except that this has the additional factor of human extinction through nuclear force. So without further ado, here's one main belief as to how it first really started. The first and most obvious point is that the two firmly believed in polar opposite political systems, the United States believing in democracy and the Soviet Union believing in communism, the United States believing in personal rights and freedoms, and the Soviet Union believing in dictatorial rights and freedoms, etc. They were the hot and the cold, the yes and the no, the in and the out, the up and the down, and yes, they were yin-yang to each other. Except more like a tornado. The second reason was the promised second front from the United States and Europe that didn't happen. The United States promised the Soviets that they would diversify the Germans' forces by recreating a Western Front in France that didn't come until 3 years after they had promised it. While the Soviet people continued piling up casualties, the United States laid back, still planning the invasion. Clearly not great for relations. The third reason is a bit more complicated. In the end of World War II, there were conferences on how to deal with Germany and the new world countries that would result of its collapse. Many different problems stem from these negotiations. Many. At the Yalta Conference, the UK, the US, and the USSR decided on how to split Germany with its four main sectors. The Soviets with East Germany and Western Germany was divided up by the UK, France, and the United States. Berlin, however, was stuck in the middle of East Germany. Reluctantly, Stalin agreed to split up the nation's capital. Border disputes later intensified and definitely did not help the case. At the Yalta Conference, not only did the Big Three discuss Germany, but they discussed the land that Germany occupied in that time, Eastern Europe. This was not a heavy issue because FDR trusted Stalin to stick to his claims of allowing the new countries to hold free elections. Funny guy FDR was. By the time Nazi Germany fell to the Allied nations, FDR had passed away due to sickness. The president who stepped up after Roosevelt? Harry S. Truman. Truman was not as trusting of Stalin, so when the Potsdam Conference came around, the third major and final conference, he made sure to do more than just nudge Stalin on his agreements about Eastern Europe. Stalin reassured Truman that there would be free elections. By 1946, it was clear that Stalin had installed communist governments into his neighboring European countries. As this was being observed, Winston Churchill was having none of it. This led him to say the famous words, "From the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended upon Europe." This is when the Cold War was first truly recognized.